Hey there. Before we get the podcast started, I just want to let you know that I'm licensed for real estate in Rhode Island and New Hampshire. In New Hampshire, I'm part of the number one team in the state, and in Rhode Island, I'm at the top 20% of my brokerage. So if you're interested in buying or selling and are looking for a balance of negotiation prowess and working with somebody that actually cares about you, I'm your guy. Call me 401-487-4477, or you can look at my website, maxwillett.kw.com or max.thedowgroup.com. Thanks, guys, and enjoy the episode. Knowledge is power is where you come to hear people's life experiences to learn from. So, without further ado, let's roll the intro.
Stay hungry, stay foolish.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
I have a dream. Will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
Hello and welcome back to the Knowledge is Power podcast. This is your host, Max Willett. We got another great guest on today, so if you could go ahead and introduce yourself, that would be great.
Thanks for having me, Max. Tim Lindsay, productivity coach with Keller Williams. I guess you wanted me to say that, I suppose. Otherwise, just another Irish guy in New England. I don't know where to go with it. So
you can go wherever you want. You know, there's no.
I
no
feel like we're
limits
going to
on
go
it.
wherever we want. Yeah,
Absolutely. Oh yeah.
Buckle
I
up,
always tell
everybody.
people this is like the Joe Rogan experience without Joe Rogan and the controversy.
Yeah. There'll be. I feel like there'll be much less weed smoked, though. Yeah, we're probably not.
I don't know. I'm not feeling that great today, so no, I'm just kidding.
Not in the same room either. It'd make it difficult.
No, it would. Yeah. Okay. Well, as you guys can tell, Tim is a great guy, and I'm really looking forward to hearing his life story because I know he's got a great one, an interesting one. And we talk about this a lot at KW, and we just mentioned it before we started recording. So, Tim, let's hear your life story. Let's hear all about you from high school till you got to be the productivity coach at Keller Williams Coastal Lakes and Mountains Real Estate in Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
It's funny. Before we came on, you were setting the table, and I went to like what I always do when an agent joins our company. I say, my first meeting is get me from high school graduation to this conversation, right? It's my polite way of saying, where did you grow up? So I grew up in Chelmsford, Mass, lived in Chelmsford my whole entire childhood. My folks bought it in '65. I think we were just talking about this. Is an interesting and horrifying fact. I was talking to my mom. I had this number in my head, like $55,000 or $60,000. My mom's like, no, I think we bought it for $25,000. And at Real Estate 101, my dad bought the smallest house. It's a humble little ranch in Chelmsford. My dad would crawl out of the grave to remind me once again it was 19% interest though. So 25 grand.
But 7 is high, Tim.
Yeah, but 19%. Damn it, waving his cane at the clouds. God rest his soul. So two sisters, both older sisters, Stephanie and Jennifer. Middle class Irish Catholic family. That's like almost predictable in Chelmsford, I guess, I suppose, if you know the town pretty well. My dad we were raised in a Irish Catholic Vietnam vet household, so it was I was the youngest and the only boy. So if anybody did anything wrong, I got yelled at most likely. And all the Chelmsford schools, it's so funny how the school systems are now. I think I was K through 4 for Harrington. I know I'm losing people. 5 and 6, we went to a separate school called Paca School. Then 7 and 8 was McCarthy Junior High, and then Chelmsford High School. And I did take one side road. My parents were not happy with my grades, 8th grade, and they're just like, we're going to send you to Catholic school, private school. And I didn't believe them. And next thing you know, my freshman year, I was at Bishop Girton in Nashua. And then I earned my way out and got back to public school. Ironically, as you and I had discussed, then I decided to go back to a private school, the most private school of private schools after high school. It's like my junior year, and my thought process is I want to do radio, and I was looking into schools to go to for radio. Always, church on Sundays. We're there. It's probably before the holidays, my junior year. And if you're a practicing Catholic, there's always a week where they talk about vocations, and they're wrapping up. It's about to be the benediction. I'm a junior in high school. I mean, I practice my faith, and I love my faith, but I'm at the time I'm 17 and a junior in high school. I'm like, okay, let's wrap this up. It's Catholic Mass. It's been long enough, you know. And they're talking about, well, the vocations. And if you know anybody who should consider a vocation, there's slips in the pews and pencils and all this kind of stuff. And I'm hearing it, but not hearing it. We get home, and we're getting ready as a family to have Sunday dinner, and the phone rings. And for those of you that remember this, and Max, I'm sure you don't, but ask your parents. The phone on the wall in the kitchen with the cord.
We had one when I was a
Amen,
little
sister.
kid.
Amen, sister. So that rings, and I don't know if mom or dad grabbed it. I think my dad did. He's like, Timothy, and I go out, and he's like, it's Father Gary. And this was back in the, here comes my age, back in the good old days. Like, we had, Father Smith was our pastor. We had like 4 associates. So there were like 5 priests at the church. St. Mary's had like upstairs mass, downstairs mass, 10 masses every Sunday. It was crazy. And Father Gary gets on, and he's like, hey, so we did that thing, and 12 people wrote your name down. Now, as a practicing Catholic, I was an altar boy. I was a Eucharistic minister. I was in the youth group, all that kind of stuff. And I had thought about it, because I think it's difficult to be that close and celebrating Mass and being an altar boy and not consider, hey, I wonder if that would be a thing. Like, I considered it, but was I worthy, right? Like, am I the right person to do that? So having, like a dozen people write my name down, I'm like, okay. So the next step was to get invited to go have dinner with the Cardinal. And he, at this, and this is down, the Cardinal's residence way back in the day was on the seminary campus down in Chestnut Hill at BC. And he's going around the room, and he's talking to everybody, and he walks over and he's like, how are you? And I'm like, good. And he goes, what do you want to do? And I'm like, honestly, Your Eminence, I want to do radio. And he said this, and I'll never forget it. He's like, you can always do that later. And I was like, oh, okay. So like, I just like, okay, maybe this is what I should be doing. So I took that to heart. I grabbed all the necessary paperwork, and I'm driving home with one of my good friends. And he's like, what did you think? And I'm like, I got all the paperwork, dude. I think I'm applying. And he's like, what? So he was at that point, he was a freshman at Assumption. So I get into my freshman year, and he actually transfers in as a sophomore. So I ended up going to do my undergrad. You automatically major in philosophy, and you get there, and you're still thinking. And I think my sisters had this notion that you're going to get there, and you're going to go, and the door's shut, and we never see you again. And if you really break down the root of the word, seminary is a place to grow, right? So I'm super glad I did it. It got to my junior year, and it was like, okay, this is not where I need to be. And I'll finish this up. I'll have a philosophy degree, and I'll go do other things. And then I did pursue radio afterwards. Looking back, Max, the blessing of me taking those 4 years and taking that time to, as I joke and say, date Jesus and see if it was right for me, it put me in a holding pattern that I think you and I have discussed in the past. If I don't take that 4-year break to sort of change my course correct, I never run into my wife later through my radio career, and also through my radio career, which is like the later blessing. I also meet Nate Dickey, who's our operating principal here. So I think myself taking the time to really explore if that was right for me, the blessing I got out of that was that I end up running into definitely the 2 most influential people in my life after the fact. So, I get out. I'm not going to ask my parents to now say, hey, because I wanted to go to Emerson, right? I mean, if you're in New England and you want to do broadcasting, you want to go to Emerson. And I'm not going to go do that, because I know that I don't need to get a degree in, broadcasting. I want to just somebody show me what buttons to hit. I'm going to talk into the microphone. I knew I wanted to be on this side of it. And growing up in Massachusetts, KISS 108, I was like a top 40 kid. And I end up going to Connecticut School of Broadcasting. I don't even know if it exists anymore. And one of the weeks, it was like a 2-month session, just enough to make you credible enough to get an internship. And the teacher's like, next week we're going to be handing out internships. I'm like, oh no, because they're gonna slap me at like the Laser in Central Massachusetts at some rock station. I don't want that. So I took it upon myself to just call KISS. I knew that David Corey, who went by Kid David on the radio, I knew he was sort of in charge of the interns just because I was an avid listener. Called, told what was going on. He's like, yeah, can you be here tomorrow at 4? I'm like, yep. So I went. I got the internship, and it was later that summer that I'm working randomly on a Saturday night, which I normally wouldn't do. And there was this huge bay of phones downstairs where like extra interns would sit to answer the phones back in the day when people called radio stations. And this is 94 at this point. Were you alive in 94, Max? I got to ask.
No, you're about 7 years too early.
Yeah. Okay. There it is. So I'm walking through the phones ringing. I'm like, I'll just grab it. And I grab it. And I get this woman and I hear this accent and it's Australian. And we start talking. And it's this girl, Diana, and her friend in the background. And they're calling because they're avid New Kids fans. This is ridiculous. And it's true. And there's a written transcript. If you want to send me $5, I'll mail it out. So the conversation starts and they basically call KISS 108 because they know that, hey, if the New Kids are doing anything, they go to KISS 108 for the interviews. All the stuff happens at KISS. And I'm thinking like, this has got to be two women that are just at a Boston hotel and they're visiting the city and they're screwing with me. And they finally take the phone and they hold it up to the news and you can hear the newscaster. I'm like, oh, they're really in Australia. So I finally frustrate Diana enough that she says to me, hey, talk to my friend. So she gives the phone to her friend, and that turns out to be Janina, who is now my wife. We talked for a really long time. And I remember hanging up the phone, and I was seeing somebody at the time, and I hung up the phone, and I thought to myself, that's going to be a problem. And they were coming home from, I forget what top 40 concert they were at in Sydney. They were coming home. They're on the train. And Janina, to this day, will tell me that she told Diana, she's like, I'm going to marry that boy. And the fact that I hung up the phone and had this sense of like, that's going to be a problem. And like the very next night I was out with the girl that I was seeing at the time. And I'm just like, yeah, this is not going to work. I felt that strongly about it. And this is back in the day. You were not FaceTiming. You were not texting. We were making real phone calls at, I think, 60 cents a minute. So I would run the math in my head and be like, okay, if I stay on the phone this long, I would have spent this much money if she was here and we were going out on an actual date, dinner, movies, right? Like I was factoring all the math, which was ridiculous. What I didn't know, she's still at home in Sydney at her parents' house. And they get their phone bills quarterly. So you can only imagine the amount of money we spent on the phone, which all paid off in the end. We can roll our eyes now. Unbelievable. And she comes over and starts visiting, does some extended visa visits. And we got to a point where her visa was about to expire. And I'm like, well, let's just do a road trip. We'll shoot up to Canada. And on the way back in, they'll stamp you. And we're coming back in from Canada. And the guy takes my passport and he hands it to me. And he looks at her passport. He doesn't stamp it. And he hands it back to her. And he said, enjoy your trip home to Australia. And we pull through and my heart's sinking and she starts to get emotional. And I knew right then I'm like, okay, everything's got to move faster. So we had a conversation. We knew that we were going to JP because everybody in the movies is like, oh, no, that's not how it works. No, if you're going to apply for resident alien, like the green card thing, marriage comes first. So and this is all fast forwarded now. Obviously, she's been back and forth a couple times. So in 96, we JP'd on Friday, September 6th. That's our wedding day. And with the knowledge that the following year on 9/7/96, it would be a Saturday and we would bless our marriage in the church. So for a year, nobody knew we were married, but we had to do that to start the process of her getting her resident alien. So that was crazy. I ran it past everybody at KISS and I proposed to her on the air at the radio station. So it all goes back to that, which is super crazy. Interning there, one of the kids I used to work with as an intern at KISS was also assistant program director up here in Portsmouth at WERZ. And he's like, hey, there's some opportunities up here. Why don't you come up and just run the board, like produce the club show for us? And I did. And he's like, that was good. Hey, stay after next week's club show if you want to, and just cut me a demo tape. So I cut him a demo tape. And that following Monday, I got a phone call from him and the program director. We'd like to talk to you about something more. And I went up and they gave me weekend overnights. And that was March of 98. And I went from weekend overnights all the way to the morning show, which was over from March of 98 to September of 2005. You're going to love this, Max. I lost my position on the morning show because my mouth got me fired. And it was nothing ridiculous. It's so stupid when I look back on it now. We were doing a bit that day. And I remember when my program director came to me, he's like, hey, can you come to my office? And I'm like, oh, my thought was it was about this bit. We were doing a bit about what is the dumbest thing you've done naked. And we had a guy on the show and he calls in and he's like, yeah, I used to barbecue in the nude, but then I burnt my meat, like all these double entendres. And I thought somebody got offended and called or whatever. We also had a conversation. My co-host was talking about bringing his car in for repairs and bringing it to the dealership. And you probably know where I'm going with this. And I'm just like, the dealership. Now, we had our entire fleet we used to bring to Sullivan Tire. And I'm like, he's like, well, where do you bring your car? I'm like, Sullivan Tire, unless it's under warranty. I'm going to my guy. I've got people like your local guy, right? And he's like, oh no, I go to the dealership. And I'm just like, the dealership? I said, I walk into the dealership. They charge me $1,000 for being fat. And I just went off. I was having a very honest conversation, like you and I are just sitting at the bar, right?
Yeah.
And we finished the conversation, headphones off, we're laughing because I was just being authentic. I wasn't thinking in the moment, Max, that 70% of our book of business at ERZ and HEB were car dealerships. Well, I'll say it now because it's all water under the bridge. Roy Herbert Toyota came from my head. He got a few other dealerships to come for me. My general manager at the time, spineless, to be quite honest. She could have fought for me, didn't fight for me. So I got ejected from the morning show, did some radio work up in Portland at a hip hop station, then came back and started voice tracking for HEB and finished out my radio career. Now, when I get to ERZ, I meet a salesperson at HEB and we develop a relationship. He escapes in 2000 to get his real estate license. We stay connected. When Janina and I finally buy our house at the end of my radio career, the official end in 2009, he's like, hey, we call him, go shopping with him, and leaving the closing. And he said, you should get your license. And I did. And I got into real estate. I joined here in 2010, sold for 4 years because I'd never sold real estate. And Nate was like, hey, I've got something in mind for you, but you got to sell some real estate first. And he ultimately wanted me to take this chair and be the productivity coach. And now I've been here since 2010. I've been in this chair since 2014.
Okay.
And that gets us here. And we have 2 boys. And you're like, when is he going to take a breath? But I did my best to give you the cliff notes. I did my best.
You might have just broken the record for the longest time talked for one question in the beginning of an episode.
Well, you wanted me to get you here.
And that was an amazing life story. And I appreciate you sharing it.
I got you here.
Lots to unpack there.
Yeah.
And so let's start off back in, high school. You said you were already thinking about radio. I want to do radio. I want to do radio.
Yeah.
What was the inspirations for that desire?
I think probably tied mostly to my love for music. I was just always, we joke about it. Not everybody in Chelmsford, obviously, but like my sisters and I were like Kiss 108 kids, just really loved music. I also remember my passion for like just putting stupidity together. I used to, way back in the day, just have this little tape recorder. And I remember walking around and just like trying to put bits together. And I would put together this little audio show called like here it comes. This is horrible. Lindsay Night Live instead of Saturday Night Live, and just super stupid stuff. But I was always sort of in that mindset. And I just thought it would be the coolest thing. Clearly, I can't shut my mouth. And I'm like, where would I thrive doing that? What would I enjoy doing? I don't know what the tipping point was for me, but I just thought it was super cool. I just thought it was awesome that you could, get to go in. Honestly, when I look back at it, I remember, I mean, and I enjoy what I do now. Janina, my wife, Janina knows that I enjoy what I do now, but like I used to roll in and you worked 8 hours. I'm using my air quotes. You worked 8 hours, but 4 of those hours were your radio shift where it was like hit button, play sweeper, play song, do some giveaways, take some, it's just, it was, and back when radio was radio, that building was full of a country station, the rock station, HEB, ERZ, the top 40 station, a news talk station, and we were live around the clock. So whenever your shift was, there was at least probably 4 other DJs in the building. Back door was always open. Kim Lies getting delivered at all hours. It was just like, that was really the cool part. If you've ever seen the movie, oh God, it's gonna kill me now. I'm gonna forget the name of the movie. Oh man, Almost Famous. Do you remember? You ever seen Almost Famous?
No.
Great movie. It's set back like in the 70s, and this high school kid gets a chance to get a shot to write an article for Rolling Stone, and he tours with this band, and he's talking to the editor of Cream magazine, which was this old rock magazine way back in the day, and he's like, yeah, man, you missed it. You're here just in time for the death rattle. Like it's almost over. And I felt that way toward the end of, I remember how excited we were when automation started to kick in with radio. And then we connected the dots. I'm like, oh, this is going to be our demise. Because they're going to find some kid in LA who's young and awesome and they love him, Max Willett, and he's going to have a 6 to 10 p.m. radio station and do nights all across the country. And that's really what we've seen happen. The syndication, Ryan Seacrest, Howard, stuff like that. So that was really the end of it. And that's how it fell apart, for sure, for radio in the grand scheme of things. I hope I answered your question. I don't know if I did.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm curious, you talk about when you were talking to the Cardinal and you told them how you wanted to be in radio, and he said, well, you can always do that later, and then you ended up applying. Do you think that there were any events that happened that made that decision easier? That because obviously you had to make the decision to apply and not go directly into radio. Was there anything in your life that made that decision easier for you?
Yeah, I had some formative people in my life. I think initially it was going back to the phone call that Sunday and hearing from Father Gary that 12 people in the parish community wrote my name down, and 12 people at that mass, right?
Right.
Actually, they were probably gathering names at all the masses over the collective weekend. So 12 people in my parish said I should go take the next step and look into this. And I think it was just that tap on the shoulder, from God, or that tap on the shoulder from the community, like, just go explore this a little bit more. And I've always carried that through all my conversations. When an agent lands here, I'm just like, let's exhaust the opportunity of you before you decide you have to be on a team or whatever, So I'm like, let's go figure this out. Because my thought process was, if this is not it, I will only benefit from it. And I felt that way in the moment too. And looking back now, I did. I never meet Janina if I go right into an undergrad for broadcasting and journalism. And I would never cross paths. The timing would have never crossed paths with because I would never meet the people that got me behind the microphone at ERZ to run into Nathan Dickey.
Interesting.
I still would have had a life, and I'm sure it would have been good. But I think I come from a faith background where everything is by design. There are no coincidences. Mm-hmm. And I think being open to the concept of devoting myself to my faith probably cleared a better path for me in the long run. I mean, people that are in my life right now, like, I wish he made another choice, and my other concern too was, what if I don't explore that? And at some point, years into my marriage, I'm laying there thinking, I was supposed to, like, did I ruin her life by being here and not exploring it? Janina might argue that I'm ruining her life by being here anyway, but like in the grand scheme of things, did I make the right choice? Did I exhaust all my opportunities? And I don't feel like I had any unchecked boxes in that window of my life that I have any regrets of not doing that and not dedicating myself to the faith that I think has made me who I am.
What do you think made those 12 people write your name down?
poor judgment. They just wanted to get out of there. I don't know. I think because I was present I was, on the altar all the time as an altar server. I was at that point still an altar server, had gotten to the point where I was confirmed. So now I was a Eucharistic minister. I never did, which is ironic because I love to talk so much and love, I never did lectern, which is going up and, doing first or second reading. Never did that. Just always present, I don't know. And maybe it was my parents. Like, let's just get him out of here. We'll get him. I don't know. I don't know who it was. I don't know necessarily. I can't decide in my head right now in the moment what might have driven people to do it, because in the moment I didn't feel worthy. I think people struggle with that decision because, like, am I worthy? Now, honest conversation, you look at the Catholic Church now, and you would ask yourself, are they worthy of me? A lot of people might feel that way. And I pull no punches when it comes to this. I am horrified by what our church has done to ourselves. And I maintain my faith because it's the fallibility of man that screwed all that up. And to be quite honest, to be totally transparent, the cardinal that I was talking to was Cardinal Law. And Cardinal Law, if you do your homework, was the person that swept a lot of stuff under the rug. So it's really crazy that he was the person that helped me in the moment emotionally decide to take that next step. And yet he caused so much damage in the Boston diocese. It's heartbreaking, quite honestly. But I can't intercept my faith with God, with all the screw ups that are happening here, with the fallibility of man and the decisions that were or weren't made, or, horrible decisions. But I'm not going to let it affect my faith, because that's
absolutely
poor decisions that people made. But I'm so grateful for the experience, because again, it got me here with my wife and my two boys, my relationship with Nathan, and my career that I have here at KW. And then that's the other thing. I didn't interview. A lot of agents will interview after they get their license. I was doing it at the behest of Nate saying, come play with me. I trusted him implicitly. We just bought our house with him. Didn't even know that you did sort of interview the brokerages, not the brokerages interviewed you. And then I walk in and I see God Family Business. It's like I didn't miss a beat, I can't imagine doing real estate anywhere else. I get to be a productivity coach that there's no penalty if I bring up faith or mention God. And I'm not going to do that. I know we have an ecumenical group. We have 560 agents here. They don't all practice my faith. Some people are very, very upfront with me that they don't want me to, they celebrate their atheism. I'll say that,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I'm fine with, because you know what, to each their own. And I'll remind those people that practice that you have to believe it exists to be against it. So there's also that.
Absolutely.
The belief in nothing is agnostic.
That might be a topic for a different episode.
That's a whole nother program, man. Yeah, we can go anyway. It's so funny. We were in the green room before you got started, and you're like, hey, so on time. And I'm like, don't worry. Been married 30 years. Janina doesn't need me to get home any faster. We could go for 4 hours. Maybe we'll pull a Rogan. Who knows?
So why don't you tell me what you really dislike about modern Catholicism and atheists?
How mad are you at what happened?
Okay. So let's talk about your journey at the seminary.
Yeah.
Right. You had talked about how you realized, this really wasn't for me. Can you pinpoint a time during your time there where you made that decision? I said, this isn't really for me.
Most likely collective moments, right? That were quietly stacking up. I remember moving in. And if you want an image of what it was like, it's on there's the Brighton campus, and we were that was a whole other experience. We were doing most of our philosophy and theology on our campus, and then we would cross the street to go to the main campus for like all of our other classes. And the first day of our freshman year that we went over to the main campus at BC, there were a few of us walking back, and it was me and a couple of classmates, my classmate Chris O'Connor, John Murray, and there was a senior walking back with us too. And oh God, what was his name? Bernie. I'm going to forget Bernie's last name. Doesn't matter. Still ordained. God bless him. And we're walking back, and we were all thinking the same thing. And me and my classmates were thinking the same thing because we just marched through 8 million beautiful Irish Catholic girls whose dads are loaded. And we're like, I'm going back to my room to pray and cry myself to sleep, right? You know? So it was like a little bit of a wake up call. And John Murray, God bless him, he goes, I'm like, what? And he goes, it's going to be a long 4 years. And Bernie Bourgeois, that's his name, Father Bernie. Now Father Bernie, senior at that point. He goes, yup, lots of studying. Like he had no idea what we were talking about because we're still shell.
That's how you knew he was meant for it.
He's been there 4 years. We're shell shocked. We're all walking back like, what am I doing? You know? But I remember moving in, and the thing I promised myself was I was not going to show up and not be authentically me, which I think years later, I still show up at this office and I'm authentically me. And I think we have to, if we don't allow ourselves to be our true selves, we're not really serving the gift that God gave us and the purpose that we're here, you know? So I'm hanging up Public Enemy posters. There's a Slick Rick poster on my wall. All my hip hop posters are up. I'm not going to show up and try to be somebody I'm not. And we all had our own rooms. So think, if you've ever seen the movie Dead Poet Society, like that's what it was like. It was all, you know, it was beautiful building, St. Clement's Hall. And I had a kid across the street, listen to me, across the hall. He had just come in from Fairfield University. And I knew we'd be friends because he showed up with an FU sweatshirt on. And I'm like, oh, I love this kid already. God bless him. Brian Clary, he's from Quincy. He transfers in just like my good friend Billy Sweeney did. So they're both transfer sophomores. And I remember spending so much time with him. And I remember thinking to myself, he's cut out for this. I was mirroring myself against him, like, oh, Clary's dialed in for this. He's so dialed in for this. And the irony is, in the end, so he's a sophomore, obviously. So after you do your undergrad, if you come in out of high school, you're doing 4-year undergrad, then you go on to the theology house. So it's the philosophy house for 4 years. For your undergrad, then you go to the theology house. If you finish your graduate studies and you don't get ordained, you get a master's in theology. If you get ordained, they call it a master's in divinity. Clary gets ordained. And within 6 months of his assignment to his parish in the Boston Archdiocese, he goes away to sober up. And I certainly, as his friend, didn't celebrate that, but it was such a relief for me because don't forget, at this point, I have now left. I'm off. I'm doing radio. I'm meeting Janina. I'm starting my life that I have now. And I remember hearing about Clary and thinking to myself, everyone's going through their struggles. Everybody was battling something, their demons, right? The great story about that is he goes on to do that. He comes back and he is, I'm not sure if he's still in this position, but he is the lead for the practice of sobriety for the entire archdiocese. So he helps other priests who battle that same thing. And he's gone on to be a wonderful priest. He ends up marrying Janina and I. And he actually celebrated, my dad died right after COVID started. So we had to have a delayed celebration of life. And we did that down at the military cemetery in Hyannis, not Hyannis, don't mind me, in Bourne. And he came down and celebrated that for us as well. So he's been a dear friend. And all my classmates that still stayed and got ordained, I had like 35 priests on the altar. It was like a rock concert when we got married because I brought all my friends to be part of it. So, but no, nothing collectively. It was quite clear to me, like, okay, I'm glad I did this. This has been good. Wondering like, what am I going to do with this philosophy education? But I think it's come to benefit me in the long run. Because I think Nate saw that as a piece of it. Like, okay, there's a Father Tim element that's going to be beneficial in this role, you know?
Absolutely. All right. So you graduate, you end up getting into radio.
Yeah.
In the early stages of radio, was there ever any doubt saying, oh God, maybe this isn't for me either?
I love that you brought that up because I remember having my midlife crisis at 25. I'm a handful of years into radio and I'm like, what is happening? The perception was for me immediately, I'm doing this wrong. All the other guys that I'm working with are like living in their parents' basement or in the van down by the river, or they got the studio apartment. They're all single. They're all taking advantage of being single and on the radio on a top 40 station. I'll let you connect those dots. And I'm at this point when I start in March of 98. Don't forget, I got married in 96. I'm 2 years married starting my radio career. And there's no concerns with that, but I sort of felt like I was doing it wrong. There was a little bit of that. And then without fail, you see people that you have to have an ego, I think, to be successful in any industry. You got to be your biggest supporter. And I think my biggest challenge was maybe watching people around me move faster. And that was challenging for sure. For me, though, the benefit, I was very fortunate that I did my entire radio career outside of that little blip where I went up to the hip hop station in Portland after I lost the morning show. I went from my internship at KISS, I drove up the street, and I did my entire radio career from weekend overnights to the morning show. I got to do every shift. So that to me was like one big fat box checked. Like there was nothing that I didn't do in radio that I didn't want to do. And when people talk about it, they're like, oh, don't you miss it? I missed what it was. I missed what it was. If I could go back, if I could go into that building and we were live and it was what it was before the death rattle, you know, as Philip Seymour Hoffman, who played the part in that movie, says, sure, but it wasn't. And, you know, and Nate leaving was was a canary in the coal mine, sort of. He's in sales. He's not enjoying it. He always wanted more. That's why he is who he is. And we're on the Thomas Layton doing like an ERZ listener cruise. And he's standing there with me. It's like, dude, we got to get out of here. And I couldn't hear him for what he was saying because the radio portion, the broadcast part, it's almost like operations and sales in real estate. It was sales and broadcast. And the broadcast end of the building was like a frat house. Like I'm having a grand old time. All my friends are on, like it was just one big fiasco with a 4-hour air shift where you had even more fun. So, there wasn't a moment where I didn't think it was for me. I exhausted it and it had run its course. When I got let go from the morning show, the very next day, this is super ironic, Janina lets me know she's pregnant with Cameron, our youngest. And in that moment, I'm like, well, I'm not packing her and Aiden into a car with a U-Haul in the back chasing my next morning show somewhere in the country. It had served its need. You know, and I don't know why I felt that, but I did. I didn't know what was next. And podcasting wasn't a thing yet ish. It was, but it wasn't. So I wasn't sure what was next, but I felt happy and satisfied, I think, with that. I'd done what I could do, you know?
Yeah.
I suppose.
So after you got let go from the morning show, did you continue with radio a little bit after that, or was it just?
Yeah, so that's September 2005. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, that's September 2005. I jump up and I do about a 6-month stint at 95.9. It's RED. It's a hip hop station in Portland.
Mm-hmm.
And then that never really clicked. They didn't have the money to bring on more people. So I don't know what it was, but it was cool because it checked that boxes. I always wanted to do hip hop radio. So I did that. And then I got a phone call from Chris Garrett, a dear friend who was the program director at HEB. And he's like, I have a project for you if you want to come back. And it worked because at that time we had the boys. Janina was working full time. I was like the stay-at-home dad. And I could be at home with the boys. She got home, give everybody dinner, get everybody into bed. And I could shoot down here. I would jump into Planet Fatness and hit the treadmill. And then I would, as long as I got over to the radio station by like 11:45, I could go in and voice track. This was the technology that was taken over. I could voice track my overnight show into the Morning Buzz, which is the rock station show that's still on to this day. And because you would just go into the software and you'd find the little gap in between the songs and you would insert your talk break and record it and walk away. I would drive home listening to myself on the radio. So I still got to be on the radio. It was a pretty premier spot because overnights leading into the morning show got, and that was back when people were listening all the time. It's just such a night and day thing. And it was at the end of that April of 2009, Clear Channel, who I affectionately call Cheap Channel, who now call themselves iHeartMedia because they're hiding because they're $40 billion in debt. I wish that was a joke. It's not. But they're still open. It's crazy. They eliminated 3,000 of us nationwide in one day.
Hmm.
And I remember saying to my program director, I said, they're going to get rid of all the part-timers. And he's like, well, they would never do that. I'm like, they will. They'll make all the salary kids, which I was when I was at a ERZ. They'll make all the salary kids do all the work that we leave behind. And sure enough, everybody that was part-time got hacked. So it's my second time getting let go from that building. But like they
So,
say, you're not really in radio if you haven't been fired.
yeah, well, sorry to keep talking about it, but that first time you were let go, or,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
did that make the transition out of radio into real estate a little bit easier for you? Knowing that, all right, I know Nate, I'm going to be my own boss for a little bit.
Yeah. I didn't honestly. So this is, radio had ended in April of '09. We skipped a little bit here. My wife Janina loses her younger brother Jay in 2007. Jay, since junior high, had been in over his head with just the wrong crowd. Celebrated a little too much with the narcotics and all that kind of stuff. He was if he wasn't drinking, he would have like the DTs, like he would be shaking. He was that in over his head, and he had for a stint, his last stint here in the States, he was living in Henderson, just outside of Vegas, and bar backing and bartending in Vegas. And he had finally decided he was going to go home, which was good because I just thought it was such a bad place for him to be. Like Vegas, everything's available, right? And he said, well, before I go home, he had met a girl prior to that who was from South Carolina. They got engaged. It ended. And he knew that she was in France at the time. He's like, on my way back to Australia, I'm going to go to France. I want to see Angela. He wanted closure. And on that trip, he was in Nice, France, and they found his body at the base of a set of stairs in a parking garage. We don't know if it was foul play. He had a grand mal contusion to the head, which is horrifying. And his blood alcohol level was through the roof. So we know he was inebriated. We just don't know if it was foul play or not. That obviously, that was a huge thing. We had gone home for a month to take care of all that. We had to repatriate his body back from France to Australia. We take care of all that stuff. And I remember saying, Janina was getting home from work. Her parents had called me. They're hysterical. And I remember thinking, she pulls in and I'm like, I have to tell my wife in about 2 minutes that her brother's dead. And it felt like your dad got home and you had a crappy report card. There was no other way to explain it. And she comes in and she's like, what's going on? I'm like, hey. And I'm like, your parents called. And she knew. We'd been waiting for the phone call. It was like that imminent. Like, when are we going to get a phone call? It's going to happen, because he had tempted fate too many times. She's crying. She crumbles like you see in the movies. Tiny Aiden runs out and he's like, is mommy okay? Is mommy okay? Because he thinks I'm hurting her because she's freaking out. As it all calms down, we're sitting there that night. And I said to her then, I'm like, your parents are going to move here. And she's like, no, they're not. I'm like, mark my words. They're with us now. They're in Stratford with us. Because at that point, we get over there and our second night there, we're at dinner. And they're like, so we've been talking. And I'm like, here it comes. So they came to move over, and it only makes sense. She's the only child they have left, and we have their only grandkids. So it absolutely made sense. So as that's all happening, we knew that we needed a house that was going to serve all of us, where we could still have separation. We did not want to share a kitchen and all that kind of stuff. So we found the perfect house in Stratford where we could create their portion of the house, our portion of the house. It would also serve moving forward at the time, because we knew that Cameron would probably be with us for the rest of forever because of he's autistic and diabetic. And to manage all that kind of stuff, when they leave this mortal coil, we would have that space for him if we're still in that house. So we called Nate to go shopping. And it was after that where we're closing that November, and he's like, you should get your license. So I'm going into real estate. Honestly, Maxwell, I have no idea what the hell's about to happen. Like Nate says, this is a great idea. Don't worry about it. As long as you know people, we'll figure out the rest. And that's the case. It's like, it's relationship based, like any good sales position. And I didn't have any idea. I mean, I'd done other sales positions, but this was the most intimidating for sure. You know,
Yeah. Uh okay. Thank you for sharing that. But yeah, so I feel like talking about real estate now is a little inappropriate, but
it's the whole story, dude, man. It's a mini series.
yeah. So let's talk about real estate then. So when you
Sure.
first got into real estate, like, you know, you got this guy Nate Dickey who you obviously have a past relationship with, who's telling you, "Oh, it'll be great.
It's
You
gonna be
know
great.
people. It's gonna
Yeah.
be great." Was there any point? Obviously, I feel like every person that gets into the real estate industry has doubt. How
Oh
deep
yeah.
was that doubt, and when did it start, and where did it come from?
A sales role I did before real estate was with there was a company, and I think it's still bouncing around. It's New Hampshire based. It's called PC Connection, and I jumped in there for a hot second. Ben Torrance, who was manager of my department, they all knew me from the radio, and like, oh, he'll be great. The challenge for me, and I think we all suffer this in this industry too. I was no longer being Timmy on the radio. I'm calling people, and we all suffer this. I'm calling people, corporations. We had big accounts, and I'm calling to see if Willett Productions needs 80 more servers for their server farm. Like, oh, you know what I mean? And I don't really know what I'm doing. And I wasn't getting on the phone and authentically being Timmy. I was getting on the phone and being Timothy Charles Lindsay. I sell electronics. Like I was too cardboard, and I never clicked there. Here for me, what the biggest challenge here was, getting over the hump of being okay with connecting with people and having the conversation that I'm doing this now, and I think my biggest challenge was what we all suffer. I don't want to get on the phone and be salesy. We're afraid of rejection, which is ironic because we're talking about that book this week, Rejection Proof from Jia Zhang. And then I think it periodically chips away as you close another deal, close another deal, close another deal. And at that point, going back to being 25 and having a midlife crisis because I'm in radio and I'm married and I'm already on plan B, right? Like Priesthood was A, radio's B, and now here I am, this could be C1, I guess, because, coaching, perfect. So real estate was plan C, and now I'm doing this other portion of real estate now as the productivity coach. So I think, yeah, being on plan C was a little scary. Like, is this going to catch, and why does this make sense? And, I've had an opportunity to do all the things I wanted to do, which is, I'm pretty fortunate because when I look at it, I would have never predicted this. I grew up in a household, and I think a lot of us, full disclosure, I'm on the short side of my 50s. At 53, a lot of us in this generation grew up, and it was like your parents are like, you're going to finish high school, you're going to college, you'll get a Buick, you're going to an office, you're going to take care of your family, you're going to send them to college, right? Like it was tab A, slot B. My dad was not like, grab a backpack, go to Europe, find yourself. That was not my dad. And my dad would support anything we did, but there was an understanding. There was an expectation, and there was a life for us that he was fighting for that I think he would have been challenged by any of us not doing, like do the next right thing. And for all my friends, we all grew up, it was high school, then you were going to college. There was no question that you were not going to do that. So that regimented pathway as a high schooler, and then seeing, oh, look what I did. I went and explored that opportunity. Then I went and did my true passion that as a kid I wanted to do, walking around with a tape recorder. And that brought me into the connection with these two relationships that are now my wife, who brought me my kids, and my relationship with Nate that brought me this career. Like, it's pretty full circle. Like, is it a perfect life? No, it's mine, and I'm super grateful for it.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think this is a good point to start wrapping up. And
Sure.
I really, really appreciate your time, Tim.
Yeah, bud.
But, I like to cap off every podcast with this question.
Sure.
And that question
you were
is...
a tree. No, just kidding.
I don't even know where you were going with that, but...
You've never heard that question? If you were a tree, what tree would you be? No?
See, this is... You were in radio. I started the podcast.
Sorry.
Howard Stern was right. Podcasting isn't going to go anywhere.
Well, you seem to be doing well, sir. So I will. I'll fight back on that one. Go ahead.
If you were to leave one piece of advice to the listener, what piece of advice would that be?
I'm trying to figure out the way to word this because I've said this a whole bunch this week. Don't take advice from people who aren't doing what you want to be doing. And not even necessarily in your industry's vertical, but are there, like when we go to, just to divert a little bit, a lot of us are about to go to the Keller Williams family reunion thing. And I think a lot of people will go and they're like, I'm a lead buyer specialist. I'm a lead listing specialist. I'm going to go to all the lead buyer specialist breakouts. And I've over time understood that it's more important to go and find the individuals that you know are thought leaders. I'd rather go see Max Willett talk about basket weaving because I'll glean some greatness from his process rather than just go to the topic. So if there's somebody who's doing something groundbreaking in any industry, I would take advice from them as opposed to, I guess the old saying that I keep throwing around is the judgment only comes from behind. People in front of you do not take the time to turn around and judge you. They will take the time to turn around and lend a hand. People behind you have time and a great view. And that's where the judgment comes from. And it goes back to people writing my name down on those slips. It's validation. People believing in you. And I think if you're going to take judgment from somebody or advice, don't take advice from somebody who you can sense is probably judging you in your absence.
Absolutely. Amazing piece of advice, and I really appreciate you sharing that. And Tim, I am insanely lucky to have you as my productivity coach.
I appreciate
at Keller
that,
Williams. And
you're unfortunately right next door, so we're neighbors with a very thin. I'm going to say it for Nate. It's a very thin wall.
Yes, Nate. Come on, did $2 billion in volume, Nate. We can afford thicker walls, maybe.
Some insulation, yeah, or some headphones. Some headphones for Max, so he doesn't have to listen to me.
Well, what was I just going to say? I forgot. That's not good. Maybe I'll cut this out. Man, I made it all the way to the end, and I can't remember what I was going to say. Don't got it. All right. Well, thank you, Tim, for coming on the podcast today. Really appreciate it. And thank you all for tuning in to the Knowledge is Power podcast. And we will catch you in the next one.
Thanks, Max.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. Please leave us a review. It will help us reach more people. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, guys. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. Also, comment.